Hello, my name is Alex, and welcome to Eclectic Eccentrics, a series in which we will be looking at some marvellous and some not so marvellous individuals who have been described as eccentric somewhere along the way. Their stories might delight, terrify, or intrigue you, but they will always entertain. The time has come, my merry band of listeners, to ready ourselves. The 7 trumpets of the apocalypse are playing, which means that Series 1 of Eclectic Eccentrics is almost at an end. But we do have time for one more hurrah before we face our judgment. In this series we have heard about the eclectic lives of a number of varied individuals who have been described as eccentrics. As you have heard, eccentricity encompasses a wide range of people and behaviours. So the question is, what is eccentricity? It is perhaps hard, if not impossible, to define. Fortunately, much smarter people than me have tried. Now, one observation of eccentricity is the idea of isolation, or perhaps better phrased, a comfort and a preference to being alone. However, this is not always the case. In fact, in some corner of London, a group of eccentrics get together quite regularly to wine, dine, make conversation, and most importantly, raise money for charity. This group of creatives, entertainers, sportsmen, politicians form the fittingly named the Eccentric Club. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at the history of the club and what it looks like in the modern era. So let us dive into a little bit of history before we take a look at what the club gets up to today. Founded in approximately 1780, the Eccentric Club has undergone several incarnations throughout its history. Originally, the club derived from a Whig debating group called the Brilliants, the Whigs being an old British political party. However, from the off, the Eccentric Club was not politically aligned, and in fact members swore not to hold debates on politics or religion. We all know how divisive these conversations can be. Instead, the club focused on true sociality, virtues which they deemed were getting rare and eccentric. Now, the Eccentric Club was not always called the Eccentric Club. No, in fact, when it was first founded, it was known as the Eccentric Society, and also the Eccentric Society Club. It wouldn't be till much later that the name was changed to what it is today, but we'll get onto that at some other point down the line. Early members of the society came from a range of backgrounds, but were predominantly lawyers, politicians, and journalists. Importantly, however, they were considered extraordinary in that they were critical thinkers and mould breakers. As is the case today, members were known for their wit, good standing, no matter their class, their impartiality in relation to politics and religion, and most importantly, their interest in pursuing charitable causes. An early commentator in the society, an author called John Timms, recorded that there were over 40,000 members. Such a number is, however, unlikely. The club's own website, however, does describe the society going through a period of rapid growth at the beginning of the 1800s, so who knows? However, by the mid-1800s, interest in membership in the club had waned, and it was disbanded. This, however, did not spell the end of the Eccentric Society. 12 years later, after the club's first dissolution, it returned. Well, a club called the Eccentric Society returned. But was this all a guise? It's not clear, with some sources saying that this second incarnation of the society was not related to the first society at all. As you'd expect with a club called the Eccentric Club, its history is not the clearest. So what follows is a sort of amalgamation of the information I have garnered from across various sources. Needless to say, and as you would expect, each source I have reviewed says something slightly different. Though the history of the society at this point is patchy to say the least, the late 1850s, early 1860s does appear to have been an important time, for it is said that during this time the society changed its name to the Eccentric Club. This was allegedly in response to the changing demographic of the club, with more creative individuals being brought into the club's fold. It appears that the club failed to really gather any steam, however. By the early 1880s, it was struggling again. Older members had either resigned or had been busy shifting off their mortal coils, and with this, the lease in the Society's HQ, somewhere in Leicester Square it's speculated, came to an end, with no further premises being secured by the club. This resulted in the club's members dispersing elsewhere, and, once again, the Society withered away. But not for long. In 1890, the club was resurrected for a third time, and this time it came back with a bang, all thanks to a chap called Jack Harrison. It was at this point that the club's dynamic really shifted, with a real surge in members coming from the arts. And so integral did the club come to those involved in the arts that for many years the club housed the Grand Order of Water Rats, an organisation made up of entertainers, including Charlie Chaplin and Tommy Cooper. This order still exists today. The club especially appealed to these entertainers because the club was open until the wee small hours, until 4 AM in fact. This meant that when actors and musicians finished their evening shows, they could come to the club and sit back with a good drink. It is recorded that they would not necessarily change out of their performance garb either, fake blood and all. These new late-night members became known as the Night Owls, which gave the club its logo. The logo depicts an owl standing on top of a clock which is running backwards. The club does, of course, have its own backwards running clock. Also included in the logo is the club's motto, Nil Nisi Bonum, meaning nothing but good. Curiously, when this third attempt of the club came around, they may not have been originally known as the Eccentric Club at all. The London Wanderer website details that this third club was only able to use the name of the previous clubs because of a chap called Sir Charles Wyndham. You see, he allegedly got so frustrated at the committee's inability to choose a club title that he called them a load of eccentrics. And it stuck. By the time 1914 rolled around, the club were based at a hotel on St James, near to Piccadilly Circus in London. The club at this time was a strictly gentlemen-only club, no women allowed sadly. This would fortunately change in subsequent years. In some ways it was a very typical gentleman's club. Poker, smoking, drinking, etc. It did, however, in some ways live up to its name. They had, as mentioned, the backwards running clock, and another clock which only had the numbers 12, 1, 2, 3, 4 on it because of the aforementioned night owls, who, as I said, only went to the club between 12 and 4 AM. The club at this time was very popular and ran for several decades, including throughout the First and Second World Wars, where the club raised tens of thousands of pounds to assist with the war effort. It was also reported that every Christmas the club would give out free meals to those in need. Many of its members, of course, also went to fight on the front lines. Such charitable work was very untypical of similar clubs at the time. Unfortunately, as with many establishments, the years following the wars were not easy. Through a series of mishandlings, the clubhouse was ultimately lost, and by the mid-1980s, the club was once more no more. Fast forward to 2008. The club was re-established for, so far, the final time, and they've done pretty well. First, women are now accepted, and about bloody time too. They also secured a famous patron, the former Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip nonetheless. It does not currently have a clubhouse, but uses a range of London premises, and today the club reports it is formed of people from a range of backgrounds and interests, including those involved in art, law, politics, science, and business. A list of some of the prominent members can be found online on their website. So there we have it, a quick run through of the club's eclectic history. But what does the modern day club actually do? What are some of their key events? What makes them eccentric? A few of the most well-known activities include a traditional Friday the 13th dinner, where club members come together to eat, whilst committing themselves to typical unlucky activities. This includes walking under ladders, opening umbrellas inside, and decorating the room with figures of black cats. They also arrange their tables so they have 13 diners at each, spill salt, and cross their knives. The evening begins with a goodbye and ends with a bon appetit. In between, they have the meal, which is eaten backwards, with pudding first and starters at the end. There are also other events, such as Battle of the Verse, where poets and general wordsmiths pit themselves against each other in a battle of words and wit. They also hold the coveted Eccentric of the Year award. Previous winners have included Robert Romeo Coates, an amateur actor who lived in the late 1700s, known for his mistaken belief that he was the best actor the world had ever seen. He is particularly remembered for continually forgetting and making up not only his lines, but entire scenes on the spot. He would then reenact his favourite scenes, usually dramatic death scenes, several times during a play. It's also reported that he enjoyed wearing furs, even in the hottest of weather, and glittered head to toe with diamond buttons and buckles. More recent winners have included a chap called Barry Kirk, also known as Captain Beanie. Captain Beanie is a self-proclaimed superhero from Wales who paints himself orange. As with many of the winners, his most notable achievements, however, have been his work in fundraising for charity. Not everyone wants to be included in this contest, however. Lord Bath, the former 7th Marquess of Bath, asked to be withdrawn from the competition when he found out he was being considered for the title, as he considered himself, as most true eccentrics do, not actually an eccentric. For those of you unaware of Lord Bath, he was a flamboyant, colourfully dressed individual who had over 70 mistresses, which he referred to as being his wifelets. These so-called wifelets lived on his estate and were known to break out into fights when deciding who was going to be sleeping with the Lord that night. He was also known for decorating his home with erotic scenes from the Kama Sutra. Despite his requests, Lord Bath still dined with the club and was made an honorary lifetime member. The most recent winner of the accolade, as recorded on the club's website, was a chap called Stephen Payne, an ex-teacher and extraordinary traveller. Mr. Payne's trips have included cycling 300 miles, on a penny farthing, whilst dressed as a Viking, weapons and all. He has also crossed the Alps on a space hopper. And there we have it. That, in the nuttiest of nutshells, is the Eccentric Club. A club, it is fair to say, that is formed of some extraordinary individuals committed to good, decent charitable work, with a good mix of wacky thrown in there for good measure. One last point for you to mull over, however. It has been queried, raised, disputed, whether the club is truly formed of eccentrics, or whether it is simply a club full of people who think and like the idea of being eccentric. It is an interesting question and one worth a ponder. Does a true eccentric think they are eccentric? And if not, could a club pertaining to host a number of self-proclaimed eccentrics truly be a club of eccentric people? Further to this, is being overly and seemingly obviously eccentric for the sake of being eccentric, like eating your dinner backwards, truly eccentric behaviour? Is it all perhaps just a show, a facade, a way for people to feel like they are someone and not just part of the crowd? Does it ultimately matter? Who are we after all to judge what it means to be eccentric? A curious thought indeed, and I would love to know your thoughts. But now, my wonderful listeners, the trumpets are loud, and the end is nigh. We have come to the end of this episode, and therefore, the end of the first series of Eclectic Eccentrics. I do hope you have enjoyed learning about some of life's more colourful characters, and that you have remained always entertained by my mildly incoherent ramblings. I shall return with Series 2 at some point, as I'm having far too much fun to stop now. But until then, however, it is perhaps not goodbye, but rather adieu.